belong to the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, which is India's largest research organization, and it focuses on a variety of industries. Unlike what Frank mentioned, we are not as focused as them on, say, space research. We look at a variety of different industries: the chemicals, the mechanical engineering industries, electronics industries, and so on and so forth. We primarily develop technologies with the intention of contributing to socio-economic development of the country, and that is the overarching theme and objective. And of course, these are all science-led technologies where knowledge creation is at the core of it and at the beginning of many of these efforts. I belong to one of the flagship laboratories of the CSIR called the National Chemical Laboratory, which is located in Pune in India near Bombay. As in NCL, we have been quite active working on different models, exploring how technology can be advanced, and those are some of those experiences that I'll share with. The other entity you see here called Venture Center is our business incubator, and we've been able to move some technologies and ideas out through new models for India into startup mode, and that's something else which also I'll briefly mention about as well. So let me just get started. The first thing I want to tell you about is a little bit about how I would like to think about the journey from concept to market, and TRLs have to be very relevant to that journey. A TRL scale which is borrowed from NASA may not necessarily be the TRL scale for every industry and every sector that we focus on. Therefore, it needs to be appropriate. That's one thing which I will talk about. The second thing I want to talk about is also some thoughts on advancing technology and how, in our experience, the need for collaborations is very critical to the act of advancing technology, and a few experiences from CSIR India, both with a few larger companies and a few smaller companies. So I'll try and cover what I can in the time available to me. Let me just get started with a very simplistic view of technology and innovation. Frank spoke about his definitions of invention, innovation, and so on. In our view, the journey starts very early when a problem and a solution meet each other to come up with a technology idea, and then take it to proofs of concepts, prototype stage, trials, approvals, and so on, and then to commercial production and a product or service eventually. Clearly, the early stage of it is the one that really excites a lot of people. It's the creative part, the inventive part really happens over there, and most of our research organizations are pretty strong in that area, and getting up to the proof of concept stage is something which many of them do regularly. On the other hand, taking it to product in use is what constitutes innovation. In the sense, the inventions you remember today are those innovations that have gone all the way till the end point, and it's important to take it all the way to really even deliver any impact on society and the economy. And that is the real bottleneck for many of our organizations, and that has to have, that of course is because of many other factors. I just wanted to point out that in the Indian context, often one has to realize that the ecosystem is very different. The kind of company and industry partners and private enterprise that we deal with come in different flavors, different types, and many of them would probably come in pretty late in this process. Of course, innovation is never such a linear process. It is a simplistic view, but nonetheless it is adequate to teach us some lessons, so that is what I'm going to talk about. All said and done, at the end of it, the idea is to try and de-risk technology, to take it through stages of value creation, through critical milestones which are basically linked to value triggers. And these value triggers are different for different industries. In the graph that I'm showing you, of course, in practice it's never so linear when you look at it with time, but different industries have different time scales, very often, say a technology in the biotech space is very, very different than a technology in, say, the information technology space. Timelines are very different, the risks are very different, the resource requirements are very different, the talents needed are very different. But that said, and actually if you look at it very carefully, even the TRLs need to mean something very different. The level of granularity needed in the TRLs also sometimes needs to be very different. The other thing I need to point out is that different research organizations work at different stages of this TRL process scale, and therefore and it is not essential that every organization needs to cover the whole range of needs to take a technology through the entire TRL scale. So if an organization is focusing on, say, 3 levels of the TRL scale, and then that area they need to define and distinguish between different levels of maturity of a technology, they will need to have a more granular, finely granular TRL scale to reflect the stage of technology, and also communicate useful information to the people who want to invest money in taking things ahead. So just as an example, NCL works with a lot of processes, and when we talk about processes, it's a very different ball game than, say, space research and sending a rocket to space. And there the TRL levels might look very different. We, for internal use, are practically, we tend to use something which is intentionally labeled A to F to distinguish it from 1 to 10 scales. But it is, as you will see, it has a slightly different way of reflecting the maturity. Pilot plants, for example, are a critical part of process development. You need to reflect that, and you may not really have the same kind of complexity involved in space or technology, where you have to integrate a lot of different systems together when you talk about certain process technologies. So you may not need the same levels that space research might use. By the way, CSIR does have a lab or other labs which work on such engineering systems. So those labs, of course, will probably use something similar to what the NASA scale uses. On the right, there is another slight modified scale where you will see that an early stage biology lab needed to demonstrate different levels of maturity in terms of in vitro, in vivo, and safety and toxicology kind of results. And it might be more meaningful for industry partners working with them to understand at what stage they are. Very fine granularity in the later TRL levels may or may not be useful for them. So common issues we find: first of all, TRL scales need to reflect the critical inflection points or de-risking milestones in that industry sector. Needs to be meaningful for people investing their resources, and that could be private investors also. TRL scales are milestones in the journey, and it's not to be assumed that every organization needs to progress the entire length of the TRL scale. You can start anywhere in the scale and you can end anywhere in the scale. It just depends on what your focus is as an organization. It should also not be assumed that a higher TRL level is always desirable for a collaboration. There are partners who will be seeking collaborations at an earlier TRL intentionally, or especially when technology is moving very rapidly. So these are some things which many people mix up, and that is one point I wanted to make today as well. Advancing technology, I just want to focus a few minutes on collaborations. If you look at the traditional models of technology development and transfer, you would often find that you would just focus on trying to find an industry partner. Very often an organization like NCL would take a technology to a point, then hope that there will be an industry partner, market to an industry body, and try and see if there can be a partner to take it to the next level. There are other models in India too, and those seem to work better for certain other organizations, where there's a closely knit user associated with a research organization. For example, the ISRO, which is an our space research organization, has a commercial arm which is downstream, which is closely networked with the research organization. Defense organizations too often have the defense as customers and a direct pipeline available to them. On the other hand, CSIR like organizations often suffer from the fact that the downstream customers are diffuse and not necessarily very clear right up front, and therefore if there are very often situations where licensing does not work. So in this slide, you can see that either organizations take it some distance and then you find that there's no believer, or there is a gap in perception of risk and value between the company and the R&D institute. So what do you do under such circumstances is a key question when one is thinking of advancing technology. Yet another issue that I want to point out is very critical to India, and it's important to know this, is the issue of ecosystems, innovation ecosystems. There are many things needed to take a idea to the market, and one of them is of course funding at different levels, right, from research funding, proof of concept funding, so on and so forth. But there are many other parts to it as well. And in the Indian context, it's important to realize that we have a patchy ecosystem. And there are certain domains where the ecosystem is good, for example, and within control of an entrepreneur or an innovator. For example, in IT, information technology, we have a much better ecosystem, and the demands on the ecosystem are much smaller. On the other hand, if you look at biotech, the ecosystem is a lot, the need is for a much richer ecosystem, and that is harder to fulfill. But there are many other domains where the gaps are even larger, for example, energy and environment. And that poses an important challenge for people who are trying to advance technology along a TRL scale. So closing those gaps, my experience has been that it's important to build the right technology collaboration models and be creative in that aspect. There can be two types of models. One can be in project mode, another could be in an entity mode. The reason I distinguish the two is because in India the entity mode is relatively uncommon. People are still learning how to build some of those. On the other hand, project mode is a lot more common, where people are able to work together in projects and try and deliver technology, and often the partner could involve commercial partners and so on. So project mode could be joint development projects, technology transfer, technology translation centers, whereas entity mode could be startup entities including spin-offs, PPP entities, and collaborative innovation centers. So in CSIR's own portfolio, one of the leading collaborative translational research programs and joint development programs comes under the NMITLI projects umbrella, and there are several examples where organizations have worked together to try and commercialize technology. I'll briefly touch upon one later. On tech partnership side, there are several cases where people have worked with companies to co-develop technology, something similar to what Frank mentioned, leading up to say TRL 6-7 levels. And of course, transfer of technology is definitely possible, but very often it's quite a lot of work to find the right partner to really hand over the baton. Entity mode, we have experimented with that in startup entities in the Venture Center, which is our business incubator, which is today India's largest inventive enterprises incubator. Generally speaking, these are some general thumb rules we can put down. Typically between project mode and entity mode, you would find that the project mode, it's harder to keep focus. Entity mode is sharper in its focus. The project mode carries with it a lot of organizational baggage, whereas entity mode can be nimble and flexible. On the other hand, it's also harder to align incentives in project mode, whereas entity mode can result in a lot better alignment of incentives. But on the other side, any entity mode results in new, fresh overheads and is very often slower to get started, although nimble and flexible at a later date. So just to give you a quick, just a few examples before I close. Here is a case where NCL worked on a molecule which basically goes to, which is a branching agent for polycarbonates, some of these large polycarbonate bottles that you see where how water is delivered has a branching agent, and that is something which NCL developed a non-infringing process. Interestingly, this involved a very interesting collaboration between a large company, which is GE Plastics at the time, and NCL. And NCL also created a manufacturer and a vendor based out of India who today is supplying almost half of the world's supply of this particular molecule. And this is something where we could raise money, fund it through our industry partners, and at the same time benefit from the commercialization in terms of both impact and revenues for further research. And at the same time, we could also show economic impact in the country. And so this is a really strong case study. Another case study where we decided where we had technology which was relevant for biofuels, and the challenge for us was that our ecosystem was not yet ready for to really commercialize a technology in biofuels. This was the time when India was regulating the fuel prices. Biodiesel was not something which we could we thought was viable. Plus, in India, we could not have used food as a food-based feedstocks to basically make biodiesel. So in this context, we had to look at a different ecosystem to advance the technology. It would not have been possible to advance it beyond a point in India in that context. So one had to look for other partners, and in this case, Benefuel is actually a US-based startup with presence in Japan and other countries, which has built pilot plants and raise money from various sources to advance the technology and take it ahead. And this is one of NCL's also quite successful partnerships, taking and advancing technology when our ecosystem was not immediately permitting that. Yet another very interesting case of technology collaboration involving partners and in the project mode is something which NCL has been working on in the area of polymeric electrolyte fuel cells with various industry partners. And in this case, to advance, this was an N-Mitli project which CSIR supported, took it that far, but to advance it further, one had to look at partners who were focused on specific applications, and we had to choose different partners to advance the technology on the TRL scale for different applications. And in this case, one application was CHP, another was backup power, and the third was transportation. And each of these have different partners, and they're advancing technology through a project mode exercise. Let me just give you a glimpse of an entity mode exercise and then close. We have been able to build spin-offs from R&D labs, and in the Indian context, it's relatively new to see spin-offs from publicly funded research organizations. The rules enabling this only came up in 2009 and are yet, people are still learning how to implement some of these things. There are many situations where very interesting science, especially addressing an opportunity which looks nascent and small, but with considerable potential in the future, is not really something that interests a large company. It looks too small for them at the outset, and one needs to find new ways to advance those technologies. And in such cases, we have been exploring new models. In this case, for example, the case of spin-off entities and startup companies, we tried to bring together a technology provider, which could be the R&D Institute, a committed entrepreneur who might be a nascent, young, budding entrepreneur, and funding of some kind or investment of some kind to build startups. So this is a model which we had to construct, and one of the things I want to point out is that it is important to create institutional mechanisms to make these things happen, and that is not easy to do, and that is something which is really critical to advancing TRLs for technologies which are nascent but with considerable future potential, and in the view of an entrepreneur. And this is a program which we have used to build several startups in different domains, including membranes, probiotics, diagnostics, and so on and so forth. And this is an experiment where we've been able to show that we can at least advance it several levels in TRLs, and also bring in dedicated and focused partners who are advancing this, and not necessarily get held up or stagnate at a particular TRL level, and stop at that point just in case, in the event and waiting for an industry partner to show up. So let me conclude here. So as I said, TRL scales are milestones in the journey from concept to market. Should not be assumed that every organization needs to progress the entire length of the TRL scale itself. The journey on the TRL scale is specific to every technology, and the timing and quality of the ecosystem supporting its development, and there's no formula for advancing on the TRL scale. Every field it's different. Partnerships are key to advancing technology, and setting up new models of cooperating and partnering is the need actually. The Indian technologists face actually a patchy ecosystem with several gaps. The ones who want to be practical will probably choose those domains where the ecosystem is within control and work within those limits, and those who are daring will probably need to either build and strengthen their own ecosystems or leverage other ecosystems. I don't see anything wrong in either of those methods. And advancing technology on a TRL scale will require forging partnerships to operate within and create the right enabling ecosystems. So thank you. I'll stop here.